The startling thing about the Gospels for me personally is that Jesus dares us to enter conversations with each other and encourages us to continue those conversations. And having read the book that Catherine and Nib have put together, it's a daring, brave, and beautiful conversation. And we welcome them here tonight, and we thank them for asking the Cathedral Bookstore to participate in this conversation.
When I first encountered Ida Wells, again, part of it was my white male arrogance, I just kept asking, who is this person? She is so powerful, and she was everywhere in American history from 1878 to 1931 when she died, and I just could not believe I didn't know about her.
Wells was a woman with all of the foibles of every other human. She embarked upon her earthly journey with tenacious courage and sought to create the same opportunity for all of her sisters and brothers. She understood that the journey to liberation was not about splitting oneself into categories of black and white or male or female, but of incorporating the whole person in the journey. I met Nibs Stroupe for the first time one Sunday a few years ago when he stood at the small podium in the dining room turned sanctuary at Open Door Community. It never occurred to me then that we would come to this day, co-authoring a book on this woman who is very precious to me.
The idea that all men are created equal was originally intended to mean white men, but fortunately others have heard that it applies to them. Yet history reminds us that whenever there is some advance toward racial or gender justice, there is a backlash and a gathering of white male power.
The way that we wrote the book was we wrote separate chapters, and then we wrote one chapter where we engaged in a discussion about some of the things that we disagreed about. And so, because one of the things we wanted to do was to model that black and white people really can learn how to have a conversation about things they don't agree on and still be friends afterwards.
This demonic power of race definitely seeped into my soul in the 1940s and 1950s as I grew up as a child of the segregated South on the Arkansas side of the Mississippi River. I grew up in what Doug Blackman called neo-slavery. Though its political power was evident, just as important was its psychological and theological power. I was so captured by this system that I could not imagine that African Americans were human beings like me. I'm loath to confess that, but I must do it. Segregation was viable not only because of naked political and military power, it was viable also because the hearts and imaginations of most people classified as white had learned and come to believe that it was God's will.
I have Ida B. Wells and Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Mary McLeod Bethune and Fannie Lou Hamer and my mother on my wall at the Center for Racial Healing. And I have Ida B. Wells on my wall at home and Howard Thurman. So those women look at me every day and say, don't you grumble. Don't you grumble. Because nothing is going to happen to you today that was as challenging as everything that happened to us was.
And the system of race is not there to classify human beings. We need that. But it's there to say who should have power and who should not. So all of us classified as white must come to terms with our captivity to our being privileged, and we have various levels.
And so my job is to continue that legacy. I've inherited that legacy of being a resistor and an interrupter. And you know, I don't have any illusion. I don't expect the United States of America to rewrite the Constitution and include everybody that's not white as equal in my lifetime. I believe that every time we stand up and stand against oppression, we interrupt the energy of oppression. And every time we interrupt that energy, we destabilize it a little bit. So my job is to weaken the energy of oppression for as long as I live, with every bit of strength I can come up with, and not to ever think that I can sit down, because as long as anybody is oppressed everywhere, then liberation is always in danger.